everybody. Here we are. We're going to talk about how to have more healthy and balanced relationships with candy, particularly around Halloween candy. For those of you who are celebrating Halloween this week, I know it can be a really stressful time to be a parent if you have concerns or anxieties around food and the food that your kids eat. It's a common question that I get from the parents that I work with on how do we go about navigating the normal eating that we have that and balancing relationships with sweets and treats and holidays. So I have a new podcast episode that's out. I hope that you've had a chance to watch. To listen to it. It's all about kind of my journey from being really kind of restrictive with food, especially sweets, to being more relaxed and abundant in my approach to sweets and treats with my kids and the effect that that has had on them and their relationships with food. My kids went from being, my oldest went from being incredibly preoccupied with sweets when she was going to be able to have some, and incredibly dysregulated around sweets, where she would eat them to the point where she would make herself sick, to now being so we made this shift when she was about 2.5 and 3, and now at 8 she has a beautiful healthy relationship with sweets. Sometimes if we offer her a kind of a sweet to go with dinner, she'll decline because she knows it makes her tummy hurt, or she knows that it's not what her body needs right now. She is really in tune and listens to her body. She doesn't eat too much. And my youngest, who's always lived in this in a life where sweets and treats aren't restricted, doesn't have any of that. And so hey everybody, say hi when you're jumping on. I'd love to see you. I don't get to see who's watching on Facebook, so if you're watching on Facebook, say hi to me. I'd love to know who's here with me. Hi, Silver Lake Doula on Instagram. It's nice to have you here. If you're watching on Instagram, I do have the question feature activated. So if you have a question, you can hit that little question mark and type it in, and it'll pop the question up on the screen for folks on Instagram. I'd love to answer your questions about this. So lots of us then, if we grew up maybe having some ideas about healthy foods, maybe some morality around foods being good versus food being bad, and we might unintentionally and with the best of intentions really pass some of that on to our kids. And so if you want to know more about my own journey with coming to understand that food doesn't have a moral value, that there is no good food or bad food, that there's just food, and how I approach that with my kids, I'd love for you to listen to this week's podcast episode. But I want to answer your questions, especially on making that transition. Hey, everybody, it's nice to see you. Making that transition from having been restrictive in the past to being less restrictive now. Dwayne, it's nice to see you. Not a parent, but want to be a better uncle. I love that. That's awesome. Okay, so what we're talking about then today is moving from restriction with sweets and treats to abundance. Excuse me, with sweets and treats. Okay, so the question then becomes, what does that look like? Now, I outlined this in a post on Instagram and Facebook. You can check those things out. But really what it comes down to is letting our kids know, hey, we're going to do something a little bit differently. I've noticed that it can be really hard for you to listen to your body when you're eating sweets, or I think I've maybe made a mistake by telling you can't have them. So we're going to try it differently this year. We're going to see how it goes. You can be gentle with it. You can be easy on yourself. You can set yourself up for success. But as you're making that transition, we have a lot of questions and worries that come up. So I want to address just a couple things. One is that research does tell us that we often think that kids get hyperactive and have behavioral issues because of the sugar content in sweets and treats. And the reality is that there isn't very much research linking sugar to behavior. what's likely going on kind of under the surface is that kids are either overstimulated, they're eating the sugar in a context that is overstimulating and wearing on their self-regulation systems, or they might be reacting to other things that are in the food. So if you know you have a kid who's sensitive to dairy or to gluten or to certain food dyes, then they might be consuming those foods and reacting to those things. And we misattribute that behavior to the sugar, and it's not necessarily the sugar. So we had one question that came in asking about, okay, so if we do have kids who are sensitive to some of those things, what do we do? I highly recommend getting an alternative that doesn't trigger that sensitivity and replacing it, replacing the sweets, finding alternatives that are highly palatable, that do have a higher sugar content, because we as humans, as animals, are 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 driven to have that sweet input in us. Those things are highly palatable. We have a natural drive to those things. And if we want our kids to learn how to self-regulate around those sweet things, they need practice. So finding alternatives that fill that, like that sweet bucket without without triggering any sensitivities they have, and then engaging and switching with them, not secretively and not forcefully, but in a conscious, kind of aware and intentional way, where you're having a conversation about that these things have ingredients that aren't, that make your body not work quite well the right way or whatever, and here are alternatives that are still very highly palatable, right, that still give the kids the opportunity to practice with that. So we're not talking about replacing like M&Ms with all those like artificial coloring with a banana. We're talking about replacing M&Ms with the food dye that maybe is triggering to your kids with naturally like vegetable colored M&M type candies. Okay, so we're making equal replacements for our kids, and abundant replacements. So part of the problem is with kids is when they start becoming preoccupied with food, is that they have been in a scarcity mindset with the food. So if we are swapping out, we need to swap out equally, and so that that abundance is still there, so that a scarcity isn't triggered in them. So, but swapping out is totally okay. Oftentimes, like I said in the podcast episode, I do swap out for chocolates that are more in line with kind of my moral place, because I prefer to have my kids consume fair trade chocolate that has less social implications than some of the standard chocolates, that, and we swap those things out, and my kids like, but I look and find alternatives. So if like one of my kids' favorite candy is an almond joy, I find a fair trade replacement for that, right? So that they can have their favorites. Because that's another thing that that research does show, is that when kids have access to their favorites, that they eat less overall, because they are satisfied more quickly by having what their favorite things are. Okay, so that's that question. And now I just wanted to address, I have another couple people who ask questions about the anxiety that they experience as they watch their kids consume, right? Consume more sweets than maybe we've allowed them in the past. And if you are just doing this for the first time this year, I want you to be prepared that there will likely be overcorrecting by your kids. That if you've been restricting and your kids have become preoccupied with sweets, that there will be a period of time where they can't self-regulate, where they do eat too much, where they do make themselves sick, right? And so part of our job is to allow that to happen. Not all the time, not every day, but during these set periods of time where they get the chance to self-regulate. They cannot learn how to self-regulate around sweets if they don't have the opportunity to. They need the opportunity, and they need to be able to make mistakes without being judged harshly or pestered about it, or feel like that their eating is tied somehow to their self-worth. Okay, to their worth as a person, that this behavior of maybe having eaten too many sweets makes them a bad kid. So we have to be super careful. We have to give them the chance, one, to self-regulate. We have to, in the midst of that, self-regulate ourselves, right? Self-regulate for us so that we don't create a context of scarcity, of pressure, and of judgment for their choices with their eating. 1 or 2 days where they eat enough sweets to make themselves feel a little funny, like not feel so great, is not a bad thing for kids. This is a good thing. They need to be able to experience it so that they can remember. My oldest daughter still remembers the time when she ate too many like cupcakes and sweets, and she reminds herself of it. Oh, do you remember when I had too much? Oh, my tummy hurt. I don't want to feel that way again. And she self-talks, kind of self-coaches herself in the moment where she's like, ooh, I really want to eat one more piece of this candy, but I remember how my tummy felt, when I did that before, and I don't want to do that again. All right. And that is, so that's what making the mistakes allows to happen. My friend Vivek is saying we layer so many associations on top of their relationships with food and their body. We do. And I want to help you uncouple those things. Food. I don't know, do you guys follow the Doodle Doc on Instagram? She's lovely. She does so many beautiful stuff about the inner child and kind of reparenting ourselves. She's going to be a guest on my podcast soon, which I'm so excited about. But she just had a post recently that talked about I don't know, like stuffed animals and loveys, and if you were shamed for having them as a kid. And I don't know that I was heavily shamed, but I was certainly prevented from using those. And the method that my parents used and through no fault of theirs, they were doing what they thought was best. I'm not blaming or judging or shaming my parents for this, but they used a sticker chart that had gum on it. So if I think if I'm remembering this correctly, if I didn't bring my blankie out of my room each day, I got a piece of gum. And that right there was the start of me using food for emotional regulation, right? To meet my emotional needs. My soothing thing, because it had a nice it was my blankie. It was a security object. When that was taken away, I was replaced with oral sensation of chewing and consuming something sweet and sugary, right? And so I've done so much work on my relationship with food, but finding that origin piece was really powerful. And as parents, many of us are concerned about not unconsciously handing patterns and relationships and judgments and all of those things to the next generation of children. And this is one of those places where we can do that. We can do that with Halloween candy. We can do that by healing our own relationship with food, managing our own anxiety around it, and allowing our children to have a simple, uncomplicated relationship with food, where what you consume says nothing about who you are, where they have lots of tools available to them to help them with their emotional experience of the world, where food doesn't necessarily have to be one of those pieces. So the self-regulation, then, when we are watching our kids consume so much food and we are feeling pulled to be like, are you sure you want to have that next one? Are you sure? Like, listen to your tummy. What does your tummy say? Is it saying you should have those? We ask those questions, right? Because we are anxious about what they're consuming. We are anxious. And so that takes self-regulation for ourselves. So having a set of mantras or affirmations ready for you to go, like on the day that they're going to go and collect their candy and be eating more sweets and treats, things you can say to yourself. Like, for example, this is an opportunity for her to learn. That's one of the things that I say to soothe my anxiety. She's learning to listen to her body. I don't need to remind her to listen to her body because she's learning about that right now. That's her body, and that's her job to learn. I'm giving her the opportunity by not saying anything, right? So this is self-talk, right? So we talked a lot last week in the reactivity to responsiveness challenge about the self-talk that we engage in, and in consciously choosing a planful and prepared intentional self-talk in these moments is one of the best ways to to soothe that anxiety when it comes up. So having planned things to say, and some other ones are, one day of more sweets and treats is not going to hurt her. Another one is sweet treats are an enjoyable part of life. Thank goodness she has chances to eat them. We're so lucky to have the pleasure of these treats in our kids' lives. So having things ready to go to say to yourself that will soothe your anxieties or your worries. But in order to do that, you have to be aware of what those anxieties and worries are. What does your brain tell you when you're seeing your kids eat sweets and treats? What is it that you are worried about or focusing on or concentrating on that's not serving you? What is it that you need to counter in yourself, in your self-talk? And so spending some time journaling before the day when they're collecting the candy, or before you go to a relative's house that's going to have lots of sweets or treats, or like a party, spending some time journaling and getting really clear with yourself on what are my concerns, what are my worries, what is the story I'm telling myself, what is the meaning I'm making when I see them eating this, or all of those things, like getting really clear on those thoughts so that you can counter them. And then the other piece of this is that your mindset matters. So when it comes to anything with our kids, what we think about them matters, what we think about ourselves matters, and how we are thinking about the scenario that we're in matters. The energy that we bring to any interaction makes a difference in how those kids are going to respond in that moment. So if we are coming to trick-or-treating, for example, with high anxiety, worried that they're going to make themselves sick, and having all of these thoughts, they're never going to sleep tonight, they're going to have lots of meltdowns, it's going to be so awful. Like if we are having all of these thoughts, we are going to bring an energy to that interaction that's one of scarcity, that's one of resistance, and that's going to suck the joy out of it for all of us. And so getting really clear on your mindset that you're bringing to these moments is so helpful. Like, I trust my kid to be able to eat sweets and go to sleep. Sleep will happen. It might be later tonight, but that's not the end of the world. Getting it really, really intentional with the mindset that we bring to these interactions with our kids, to these moments, where we are speaking into being the positive experience that we want it to be. So I think that those are I haven't seen any questions come through. It's nice to see you all. If you do have a question, you can totally ask it. I'd love to see it in the comments. Nikki's saying, just joining, so I apologize if you covered how to move forward as an adult with a relationship with sweets. Yeah, so so Nikki is asking about how to heal your own relationship with sweets and treats. I love the ladies over at Balance 365 Life. They are both on Facebook and on Instagram, so you can go and find them and follow them. Their latest podcast episode, 139, is wonderful on that. So I highly recommend. They have been so helpful for me in healing my relationship with food. Most of us have a diet or a scarcity relationship with food. Oh my gosh. Somebody is calling me, sorry. So most of us have a kind of a scarcity grounded relationship with sweets, and that makes it so that we can't control ourselves when it's in the home, right? So if there are Oreos in the home, we just eat them until they're gone. If they're, whatever it is for us. And so working on the mindset piece of your own relationship with food has been really helpful for me. And I have done that work with the ladies over at Balance 365 Life. So they have a great podcast, great content on their Facebook page. And just wonderful information anyway. But I've also used EFT tapping for that, for myself. So for some of my relationship with food, it was very tied to emotional eating, and to my relationship with my dad. And so I've used tapping, which is pressure points that are on your face and other parts of your body, that you can use to kind of rewire your emotional stress, like your stress response around certain things. And so with doing that work, that's been incredibly helpful too. So as usual, it's the mindset work and kind of then the nervous system and trauma work too. So those things go both hand in hand. And all of that is what I teach in Parenting from Within. So Parenting from Within is my group coaching program. It's open for enrollment now. And I was just talking with someone about this, that it's intended to be focused on parenting, but the reality is that all of the skills and tools that are taught in Parenting from Within apply to every single area of your life. They apply to your relationships with your parents. They apply to your relationships with your partner. They apply to your relationships with your friends or your work colleagues. It's really just about conscious living. Like it's a user's manual for having a brain and a body that you want to be more conscious and intentional in your relationships with. So the link to that is in my bio if you want to check that out. Ooh, I have a question coming in on Instagram, and I've never used this before. It's from Silver Lake Doula. What age did you start introducing Halloween candy? So with my oldest, I was heavily restrictive. I had what's called orthorexia, which is kind of taking clean and healthy eating to an extreme that's unhealthy for your mental health. I didn't at all until around, like for her, until 3 or so. With my younger one, we gave parts of candy that were safe for her when she was, I think 18 months was the first year that she went trick-or-treating with us, and just a little bit. And my youngest one has never been that interested in candy. She much prefers fruit. So she often just asked to have like craisins instead of of candy. That's just her style. That's how she is. But like as soon as it's safe to eat, it's okay to give access to it. It's much more the choking and ability to handle the food physically is more important than the candy and the sweets, in my opinion. I think that we are made to have a little bit of sugar and sweetness in our bodies. Our bodies can regulate it, and the sooner we give kids opportunities to start self-regulating about some of those things, the sooner it's they will, like, the less kind of damage we will do to their relationships with food, and the less we will have to undo as they get older. I know that many of you are going to be trying this approach to candy for the first time with older kids, and it will be harder for you than it would be if you were doing it with like a 2 or a 3-year-old who's never really had experiences having been restricted with Halloween candy or the treats that come in the holidays or at birthday parties. Undoing that work is much harder than kind of setting yourself up for success right from the very beginning. I had a post last week that was a quote from one of my like favorite parenting people, Magda Gerber, and her quote is "Begin as you mean to go on." So if you are going to do Halloween for the first time with your kid, really think consciously about like, okay, so we're going to begin as we mean to go on with this. Thank you for that question. We're at 25 months for Halloween this year, and I think it's time to start this approach. Yes, yeah. So I hope that you will tell us how it goes. So if you are going to be trying this this year for the first time, please send me an email or a message on Facebook or on Instagram. I'd love to hear how it goes. If you need help troubleshooting, you can always send a question. I can share it as a story, because as you try this, it's not easy. You'll have lots of thoughts that flow into your head. Kids will do things that make you anxious and make you worried and think that you're not doing it right. And it's not an overnight thing either. And kids don't just have one time where they maybe eat too much or go overboard and learn from that and never do it again. That's not how some kids maybe can do that, but most kids don't. It's a practice. It does take time. right? And so be gentle and kind with yourself, especially too if you're just hearing this information and you realizing, like you're realizing right now, like, wow, I've been restricted in the past. Wow, like the way I've handled this has led to these things that I'm seeing in my kids. I hope that you'll be so kind to yourself and so gentle with yourself as you make changes. That we only know what we know until we know something different, and we're all doing our very best at any given point in time. And when we know better, we do better, but hopefully we do so with heaping doses of self compassion and grace as you make those changes. And the same for your kids, right? So learning to do something new, learning to be self regulated with candy and treats is hard for the kids too. It's like you're taking away their training wheels. Maybe they've been, like if we think about a bike, learning to ride a bike analogy, they've been using training wheels, and we take them off and they might overcorrect. They might tip over, and that happens sometimes. We're right there to catch them. We're right there to help them and contextualize it, right? But we don't, like, we want to be compassionate with ourselves and with our kids as they are learning to do this new thing that isn't easy, that many grown-ups struggle with, to be well regulated around food. And so I think, like, too, just really coming home to what is your primary goal when it comes to food and your kids. Yes, of course we want them to have healthy and well-balanced diets, because their bodies are being built right now. We do want them to have healthy food going into their body so that they can grow and, be doing well. But we also, their relationship with food is what's actually going to impact their health as they move into adulthood, much more so than like what the food that they had as kids. It's the relationship with their food that we're really building in early childhood. And having a healthy relationship with food will set them up for success as they move into adulthood. And that's a beautiful gift that we can give our kids. Okay, so I have to run to another meeting. I loved spending this time with you. Send me updates. Tell me how it went. If you tried this out with your kids, I'd love to know how it went. All right, I'll see you all later.